Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast and joining me as old friend of the show, Jimmy Price, the man behind AstrosFuture.com, the Astros Future Podcast, and the biggest well of knowledge on the Astros farm system. Always good to see you, Jimmy.
I appreciate you having me on, man. It's been a little while.
Yeah, it's been a while, and let's start with the one arm in the system who's banging on the major league door as hard as he possibly can. Jimmy, what can you tell us about Hunter Brown and his progress that you've seen this season?
Man, he's been awesome. I think what you've wanted to see is him be able to extend the ability to go later into games, be able to maintain that velocity later in the games, and the ability to kind of get away from some of those walks, which are some of the issues that maybe hurt him a little bit last year. He's done all that. We've seen him go 7 innings. We've seen him have a 7-inning outing where he hasn't walked a single guy. He's had a lot of innings where he hasn't walked any. Strikeout numbers are great. Velocity is, I think he's been in the 99s, sitting like 96 to 98. I mean, he's throwing like 94, 95 mile an hour sliders. So phenomenal season for him so far. And yeah, I mean, he's done pretty much everything you'd want to see from a top pitching prospect. The only problem is the Astros are, as we all know, have a pretty decent group of starters right now. That's probably the only reason Hunter Brown's not up.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have, but could he get a September call-up and beat out, and the only two guys I can see him beating out for a postseason roster spot, Phil Maton, I know he's not an Astros Twitter favorite right now, and Jake Odorizzi, who's never been a Astros Twitter favorite, for a potential middle relief spot on a postseason roster?
Does he have the talent to do it? I definitely think so. Would the Astros go that route? I think that's the hard question. They go with a veteran like Odorizzi or Maton, who, despite some of the issues he had last year, he's one of our best pitchers in the bullpen last year in the postseason, and especially in the World Series, didn't allow an earned run. I would love to see him in that spot. I don't know, maybe if he ended up making it over somebody else, maybe over an Abreu or something. I'm not really sure, but I don't know. I feel like Maton and is probably a lot just based on what he did last year, unless the rest of the season goes really poorly for him. Based on what he did last year, I feel like they probably have him on the postseason roster. And I mean, I do think he can come up and give you some really good quality innings, either in the pen or in as a starter. Ultimately, it's just trying to find that spot for him now.
Yeah, we talked about it on my last podcast, the fact that, if there's a real threat to Maton, it's, maybe they go out and they get a really good lefty out of the bullpen, because they really need one with Blake Taylor, not really working out much this year with injuries and other stuff. So, I mean, that's to me the real threat for maybe a Maton or Odorizzi to make the postseason roster.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's probably one spot we may see them try to target at the trade deadline, try to get that other lefty. A couple of lefties that they were kind of hoping on, Blake Taylor, Parker Mushinski has been down in AAA, he's rehabbing, I think, and it hasn't gone great. So right now there's really not that lockdown lefty reliever. And I know they like to use Maton against lefties, but yeah, that's a good point. I could see them going for maybe a higher leverage lefty reliever.
Just a reminder real quick for everybody watching this, or if you're listening to the podcast as well, make sure to subscribe to us on the YouTube channel and comment as well. Would love to hear what you guys have to say about the show. We've had a taste, Jimmy, of Korey Lee at catcher here for a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, Yainer Diaz, and I hope I'm saying that right, is behind him in Sugarland. I learned from you how to say his name correctly. and I'll tell you what I've heard, and then I'll tell you, or I guess I'll let you tell me if I'm right or wrong and what you see as the future of those two guys. Now, it sounds like Korey is the better defensive catcher. Offensively, his minor league numbers, nothing special. Meanwhile, Diaz, 851 career OPS, almost identical numbers this year. What's also interesting is Diaz has played first base and corner outfield as well as catcher. So I'm wondering, is it possible that both Lee and Diaz could be on the roster next year with Maldonado because of Diaz's positional versatility?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a possibility. I think the Astros are grooming him to be a guy who can play a little bit of catcher, a little bit of first base, and then if they need a guy in left field, we've seen him play left and right a little bit. But maybe that first base position to take over when Gurriel's done. I know we got Matajevic as well, but I could see a scenario where both of them are on the roster. And yeah, you're right. Lee's more of the defensive guy. Yainer Diaz is more of the offensive guy. He's got a great track record, makes contact, hits the ball hard. Seems like a guy who's going to have success at the major league level. Honestly, his offensive profile kind of reminds me of Gurriel. And I know that's a lofty comparison, but in terms of the the high contact rate, the opposite field approach, which we see Gurriel have a lot. And then, the power, and not like a 40 home run guy, but, maybe a guy who's in that 20 to 30 home run type range.
With all due respect and fingers crossed here, we've probably seen the last of Jason Castro. I'm hoping, because I think Korey Lee is ready to go. At least you don't need him to do anything in the postseason except come in occasionally in an emergency.
Yeah, I was talking with a friend of mine about that actually. And yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I mean, I think Lee obviously is a better hitter at this point in his career. I mean, Castro's had success before, but this season has been rough. And then Lee's a good defensive catcher as well. And he's getting valuable innings right now, getting to catch some of these guys, and that'll be important for the postseason. So, yeah, if it was me, for sure, I would be having Lee as the backup catcher. And I don't know what they end up doing with Castro, releasing him or whatever. But I think Lee is ready to at least take that role, and then give you a little bit off the bench and give Maldonado a rest, be able to actually provide some offense, because that was one of the main issues with Castro this year. He was just really, really poor offensively.
Do you think the Astros are high enough on either Lee or Diaz, and trust them enough where they feel confident to use the other guy as a trade piece?
So like you're saying, to like use one of Lee or Diaz as a trade piece?
Right.
Yeah, I think. Well, it's tough because of what we just talked about. I think Lee has that defense that the Astros would probably seek at that catcher position, or Diaz has more of the bat. It's hard to say. If the right player is there that they want to go target, maybe whether it be an outfielder or whatever. I don't think anyone's off limits except for maybe a Hunter Brown, just because of what he's done. But it's also hard when you look at the Astros current roster, and in 2 years, I mean maybe a year, but 2 years from now, Maldonado and Castro are not going to be here. So you got to have some form of plan. And if the plan is just to get a veteran every year, I guess you could do that. But it's hard to say which one they value more, I guess, because they bring different things. But to say one's untouchable, I don't know if I would say that. I do think that one could be moved if it was the right deal. But ultimately, I do think they kind of have plans for Lee with what you're seeing this year and what we'll end up seeing next year as well.
Prior to the season, I thought Pedro Leon could be in the mix for the left field position next year if Michael Brantley wasn't re-signed. Michael Brantley, obviously getting older and older. His average in the minors, Pedro Leon, has consistently been in the low 200s, though. Although his OPS is over 800 as we speak. That means he's living on walks and home runs, Jimmy, which could be an issue on the next level because Sugarland's an offensive league and AAA pitchers don't have major league control yet. What do you make of his offensive? I don't know if he struggles, but the low 200s is an average for him.
Yeah, it's an interesting profile because he has that power speed. I think he's up to 30 stolen bases now in the year. He's got 20 doubles, 11 homers. Like you mentioned, he's got that OPS over 800. But he's striking out quite a bit. The batting average is low, and some of that could be just poor luck. Bad batting average on balls in play or something like that. He hits the ball hard. We've seen some of the highlight. I mean, he's got high exit velocity. Really, it just comes down to making more contact. But he's still only 24 years old. Second full season since I think the last time he played in Cuba. Prior to last year was like 2018, 2019. So still getting comfortable, I think, at the minor league level a little bit. You can see that upside there. No need to rush him. I agree with you. I thought he was going to be a player, potentially in the outfield this year, but definitely next year. So you're seeing some of the good stuff. You're seeing the speed. You're seeing some of the power. Ultimately, it's going to be about cutting down on those strikeouts, make a little bit more contact. But I think he still provides enough with the bat to potentially be an outfielder at the next level. We've seen guys succeed with high strikeout numbers. Obviously, don't want them to get too big of an issue. But if you can provide good defense, provide a little bit of pop, there's a spot for you on the roster.
Do you believe Matajevic is good enough as an offensive and a defensive player to be the future at first base if Father Time has officially defeated Julie this season?
Yeah, I do. I think he's got the bat for it. I think he's got the opposite field power the Astros would probably value in Minute Maid Park. We've seen it a little bit already. Strikeouts are going to be an issue for him as well. But I think if you go back and you look, he's been a guy that's taken a little while to adjust. We saw it in AA. We saw it in AAA from what he did last year to this year. And it may just be about him getting comfortable and getting that opportunity to get some consistent at bats and show what he can do. But I think he's got the profile that fits the first base. I think he's a good enough athlete. I think he was a second baseman and an outfielder in college, so it's not like he was a guy that was only played first base because he wasn't a very good athlete. So I definitely think he can hold down that first base position. But he's got a guy like Yainer Diaz, right behind him, and I think those will probably be the two in-house competition guys if Gurriel is done, within the next either this year, next year, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, but he's got what the Astros love these days: positional versatility, the magic phrase,
For
huh?
sure. Oh yeah, no, versatility's big. When I was prior to Sugarland's season, we talked with Mickey Story down in AAA, and he talked about that versatility. And I talked with a couple guys when I went out to Fayetteville, and they kind of echoed the same thing. Your position that you come into the system in doesn't mean that's the position you're going to debut in, but the position you debut in doesn't mean that's the position you're going to be the rest of the time. The Astros value that if you can come up and give some, help the Astros in the outfield, but ultimately you're going to be first baseman, and that's all right. They want that versatility. They want guys that can play all around, because that's how you're going to end up breaking a roster, making a roster spot. And then when the time comes, you'll be ready. You'll have some MLB time, and you can take over at a certain position. So you see it all through the minors. They got guys playing all over, and I think it's just to build that versatility. That way, there is no roster crunch of this is our only guy that can play shortstop. We have multiple guys that can do it, or whatever the position is.
All right, the biggest tease in the Astros system. We got to talk about him. Forrest Whitley left a game a few days ago with shoulder inflammation. They're saying he'll only be out 7 to 10 days, but Whitley in his 7th season, still only 24 years old, but he's only pitched 208 innings over the course of the 7 seasons. Have you given up on him, Jimmy?
I haven't. I've talked with Forrest quite a bit. And man, I feel really bad for him. I know he worked hard to get back, and he had obviously a lot of bumps in the road, pitched in Fayetteville. Things went great. Went out for his first start in AAA. I'm sure there were some nerves there a little bit. If you talk to my buddy Kenny, he was there. Some of the numbers didn't look as pretty as they actually were. There was a couple plays that probably should have been made on defense that weren't. But he came into that next start, had a clean first inning. I think he struck out a guy in the second inning, and the next thing you know, he had that inflammation, and the velocity, everything came back. The velocity was there. He was throwing 96, 97. The pitches were what he wanted to see, what the Astros wanted to see. And now it's just about staying healthy. And you mentioned he's 24 years old. We've seen plenty of guys. I think Jacob deGrom didn't debut until he was 25, and his first full season as a starting pitcher was like 26 or 27. We saw it with Colin McHugh, a guy who debuted a lot later in his career. So I don't know if that's the route he'll end up going, but ultimately it's about being healthy and getting some more consistent innings under his belt. Prior to this little issue that he had, I felt like he was a guy that maybe could help the Astros in the pin this year if he went into AAA and had a few good months. He's already on the 40-man roster. But no, I haven't given up on him yet. At this point, what's there to lose? You might as well be patient with them, see what you got. It's not like the Astros are going to be able to trade him and bring in some top player or something like that. So just be patient, see what Forrest Whitley can do, and maybe you'll end up finding gold.
You hope he doesn't take as long as Mark Appel. That's all I'm saying.
True that.
Can you give me a position player and a pitcher maybe that we haven't talked about that you really believe in after seeing what they've done this year?
All right. That's a good one. Well, the first one that pops to mind is Logan Cerny. And the reason that one does is because his offensive profile is pretty close to PEDRO Leon. He's hitting for a little bit more average, but the Astros acquired him in that Garrett Stubbs trade last year. He's a 10th round pick out of Troy, but he's had a really good season. I think he's up to 28, 29 stolen bases, got 14 home runs. Same type of, like I said, same type of profile. The strikeouts are there, but he's got some big pop, really good speed, very good outfielder, OPS above 800. So he's putting together a really good season. Another guy I'll mention, he homered tonight, Justin Dearden. He's an outfielder for the Hooks, a little bit older. He was signed as an undrafted free agent. The COVID draft kind of screwed him a little bit. It was 5 rounds. He probably was going to get drafted. He was pretty humble about it when I asked him. He said, maybe towards the end of the draft. But he was probably going to get drafted. He ended up signing as an undrafted free agent. Had a pretty good year last year. I think he had an OPS above 900. He's been in AA this year, and his OPS, I believe, is above 900 again this year. Just homered again. He's 14 home runs on the season. So that's another good bat, really good athlete for his size. He can play all over the outfield. For pitching, Spencer Arrighetti is a guy that I really like. I believe in his stuff. He's had some struggles this year with some of the walks. He pitches in Asheville, which is a insanely friendly hitter park. I think it's like 296 down to right field and maybe 305 to left. It's got like a decent sized wall, but it's up on a mountain. The ball just flies out there. That's a guy I really like a lot. And if I had to throw another one out there, I guess I'll go with someone who's been pitching really well. Jaime Melendez. He kind of flew on the radar last year. 19 years old, made it up to AA with some insane strikeout numbers. Started the season in AA this year. He's 20 years old, and he struggled a little bit out of the gate. But I think over the last maybe 4 or 5 outings, he's got an ERA under 2. The strikeout numbers have been insane. I think I'm looking at it now for the year. He's got 84 in 61 innings. And over the last, like I said, month and a half, it's been really good. He's 20 years old. He's a smaller guy. He's like listed at like 5'8", 190. But we've seen it over and over. It doesn't matter what size you are, especially nowadays pitching. You know, if you can do what the team wants you to do with the vertical approach angle, or you got the stuff, the spin rates, all that, you can pitch. And he's a guy that I'm pretty excited about, and it's kind of really starting to put it together here in the middle of the season.
Astros fans, I know, will probably be curious about the progression of Billy Wagner's son, Will Wagner. How is he looking these days?
Yeah, he did really well in high A. He was hitting the ball well. Walk numbers, strikeout numbers are pretty good. If you go look at his AA numbers, you're probably going to be like, oh man, they're not great. And he's actually hit a little bit better recently. I think he's up to like 220 in AA. But I talked to him when I went down to Corpus, and part of the issue was he was hitting the crap out of the ball, and it wasn't falling. When I was there, he struck two balls really well to left, like right at the fielder, and kind of cool. I you know, when I asked him about that, and he said that he talks to Billy. You know, obviously his father, they talk all the time. But after he had a rough game, he called him. They talked for about 30 minutes after the game, just about baseball, and he's telling him, hey, if you're hitting the ball hard, it's all you can do. You know, eventually it's going to drop. So I think he's got a bat that can end up playing. He's played second base, third base, but you know, give him a little bit of time. Same thing. You know, he had a little bit of time in his junior season at Liberty. Had hoped to get drafted, got injured, and then the game he was supposed to come back is when they canceled the season. Went back for a senior season. So 23 years old in AA right now, but you know, still getting his feet wet. But the numbers have started to improve in AA over the last probably two or 3 weeks.
Yeah, second base, and that's a position I was thinking about in the last year or so. Maybe the Astros, that's one that they need to develop because, you know, Altuve still looks like Altuve, but he's got a couple more years on his contract, and you know, I don't see the Astros paying him a lot of money going into his mid 30s. So that's a position it seems like that they would need down the road.
Yeah, maybe you got a guy like Emmanuel Valdez who's had a great season. I think everybody knows what he's been doing, hitting, you know, well above 300, leads the system in home runs, RBIs, and he's a second baseman. A guy like David Hensley, who's a tall utility infielder, played all over the place. He can play second. Will Wagner as well. So there's guys down there, and just like we're talking about, you know, they play shortstop their entire minor league career, and then they debut at a different position in the majors. As long as they've played a little bit of it, they know the ins and outs. And we saw that with Berkman. You know, Berkman was a shortstop for the majority of the time in the minors. Played a little bit of third base, and bam, the Astros called him up, and he was our third baseman for the future.
Are you starting to see any bad effect on the Astros farm system on the middle or lower levels from losing those high draft picks in the recent seasons?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you lose out on 4 over the last 2 years, right? The first, second round picks. You lose out on 4 what should be high quality talent. I mean, they're first and second round picks, and I think that that in itself kind of affects the system, right? You don't have you don't have the high names that everybody knows, the first round picks that people know. But I think what it also does is the Astros, at least, you know, under Jeff Luhnow, were really good at signing their first round pick for less money than the slot value, and then using that money to sound somebody, a high schooler in the 5th or 6th round for above slot. And we saw that pretty much every year. I mean, obviously they really killed it in the 2012 draft with Korey, and then they signed McCullers for over slot. But I think that's what you lose that slot money too when you don't have those picks. So the Astros don't have the flexibility to, you know, pay a guy $3 million, even though the slot value is $4, and use that extra $1 million somewhere else and get a better talent later in the draft. They haven't had that flexibility. So super excited for the draft this year coming on Sunday. But yeah, I definitely think you're starting to see that. And now the Astros are at a spot where if they wanted to make a trade, they have guys they can trade. You know, we talk about Hunter Brown or some of the guys, Korey Lee, they just called up Yainer Diaz, but you make a trade and you trade those guys and you really gut the system. You know, you don't have those first, second round picks to move. And Jeff Luhnow was great at moving those picks. I mean, I did an article on it, and you go look. I think he traded like 11 first round picks and maybe another or 7 first round picks, 4 second round picks. But that's the way he acquired talent, was using those high picks that he had. And the Astros, unfortunately, just haven't had that over the last couple of years. But we're back with the full draft this year, and pretty excited to add some more talent to the system.
Speaking of Luhnow, it's interesting you brought that up because I was just thinking, is there any philosophical differences that you've seen between Luhnow and Click and how they're sort of, I guess, constructing the minor leagues, or just how things are different?
I think it's pretty similar. I think we've probably seen maybe a little bit more versatility under James Click. With they're still doing the piggyback thing where a starter will start one time, maybe come in the 4th or 5th inning on the next one. So you're still kind of seeing that. I think it's really going to come down to the draft. Last year, there was promotions like crazy. You know, guys were performing after 3-4 weeks at a level, they were getting promoted. And I think that was just due to not having a season in 2020. This year's been a lot slower. So get this draft in, add another talent, a pool of, somewhere in the range of 20 players to the system, get some promotions. And I think starting next year, we're going to really get to see what Click's vision is for the minor league system. Because at this point, he's had most of the guys he's drafted. I mean, he had a 5-round draft in 2020. Then he had last year's draft. So a lot of the top guys in the system are still from the previous management. But yeah, I don't think there's a lot of philosophical differences between the two. I think they both value the development, and a lot of the coaches are the same that are around that were around 3 years ago that are around now. So ultimately, they're both. I definitely think they both have a good eye in building a system and drafting, and hopefully we'll be able to see it this year.
You might want to tell people about this because I don't know if everybody's aware of this. Didn't the compensatory draft picks change with the free agents? Like we've seen the Astros lose Cole and Springer and Correa. That's changed, hasn't it, over the last couple of seasons, right?
In terms of like what kind of picks we're getting?
Yes.
So we got a pick for Correa, but it's after the second round, and it's like the last free compensatory pick. And despite him maybe being the best free agent, I think what it really came down to was the value of the contract. Just kind of like you see in NFL, where it doesn't really matter who the player is; it's the value of the contract. He signed the 2-year deal with a 1-year option or whatever. Just not as valuable as what the Dodgers are going to get for losing Corey Seager. So yeah, the picks have gone down a little bit. The Astros do have 3 picks in the top 80. So we'll get that pick, which is essentially like a 3rd-round pick for Carlos Correa. But yeah, I mean, like for Cole, we got that 2nd-round pick that turned into Alex Santos, and then we got some for Springer as well.
I'm trying to remember, was Lance McCullers at one point a compensatory pick?
He was a comp pick in the 1st round in 2012. I don't remember who it was for. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, it's been a while. You working on anything interesting at Astros Future? And I got to mention your partner, Kenny Van Dorn, who you're doing the podcast with, a Mizzou guy. So I love that. Tell me about what's going on.
Right now, it's just kind of getting into, we're the top 30. Whenever we get this draft done, the Astros start signing. They start assigning players out. Then I'm going to redo the top 30 system. I mean, I got it updated right now, but I'm waiting to add that fresh talent in there. But just doing, talking to players, putting articles out there. Just did one on Yainer Diaz. I put a little mock draft up this last week too, just to throw some names out there I'd like to see, maybe in an Astros uniform. But yeah, me and Kenny just doing the pod. He does a great job. Works super hard, super dedicated. So great guy to have on the show with me, But on the site, yeah, it's just player interviews, and just talking to the players about how the season's going and kind of highlighting the best guys in the system, and just doing that week by week.
I didn't prep you for this, and I don't know if you have a story. So I'm going to tell you a story, and then if you've got one, go ahead. But in 2004, we're coming up on the All-Star game. It's the last time an All-Star game was in Houston. It was at Minute Maid. And a couple things. I went over there during the home run derby. I was watching Berkman's balls coming over the train tracks outside the stadium. I wasn't in the stadium for it. I thought about going after a baseball, but I would have been slaughtered like a bad UFC opponent if I had jumped in that fray. It was dangerous to get in that, but I got a chance to go to the game. And to me, I don't remember anything about the game. The only thing I remember, and the only thing that mattered, is before the game, they brought out Muhammad Ali, and he was introduced at Minute Maid Park, and is one of my heroes. So that was my favorite thing about that 2004 All-Star game.
Yeah, the only thing I really remember about it, is Lance Berkman in the home run derby. That was my favorite player growing up. So to see him doing that, and it was a surprise that he ended up hitting righty. And I think a lot of people knew that was his power side, even though he's a lot better handed hitter. I used to grow up always thinking like, man, Lance, if you just hit lefty the entire time, even off of lefties, he'd probably do better than he did righty. But he did well in the home run derby. I think if I remember right, I think he lost to Miguel Tejada. Didn't he win that derby?
I can't remember, but I was just looking at Berkman's numbers the other day, and Jimmy, I don't think anybody realizes it outside of Houston, but he is still top 20 in OPS in Major League Baseball history.
No, he's really good, and I think he's criminally underrated. He had less than 5% on his first year on the ballot, which means he fell off the ballot in 1 year. But for a switch hitter, the numbers he put up, he never won an MVP, but go look how many top 5 MVP finishes he had, and the home runs, the average, the walks. I mean, man, really freaking good hitter. And everyone, it's funny. A lot of people ask those questions, like, if you could choose one player to add to this team, this Astros team, who would it be? that's a guy I turn to. I mean, obviously like a Bagwell would be cool too, but a guy I turn to a lot of times is Lance Berkman, just because he was so good. And then you go look at his playoff numbers, man, and he killed it in the playoffs, even in 04 and 05 when the Astros made it to the World Series in 05, and we got swept by the White Sox. But look at his numbers in the World Series. He was the one guy that was doing damage really that entire postseason against the Braves, against the Cardinals, then against the White Sox as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to live long enough to see it, but I get a feeling that with what I've seen from the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame voting committee, especially the seniors, that Lance is going to get in down the road. There's no question in my mind about that.
Yeah, I think he deserves it. If you really, it depends on where you want to put the level. You want to put the bar extremely high and make it where it's, only the elite, the best of the best, and you want to say he's not up there, then maybe you can make that argument. But if you look at some of the guys that are in, he's got better numbers than some of the guys that are in, especially like I said, offensively and man, the postseason numbers really stand out to me too. I mean, we've seen it with Springer and Altuve, but after growing up watching Bagwell and Biggio, and unfortunately, I know they had it was a little bit different back then, but they struggled in the playoffs. And then to get someone like Berkman, who was very clutch in the playoffs, put up those numbers, yeah, it'd be nice to see him kind of get that honor. I know he's coaching over at Houston Baptist right now, so I'm sure he would appreciate it. I'm sure like Houston fans would love to see him get that honor and be a Hall of Fame inductee.
Yeah, if Harold Baines can get in the Hall of Fame, come on, Lance Berkman should be in the Hall of Fame.
Exactly.
It's Astros Future is the Twitter handle. It's astrosfuture.com, Astros Future, the pod. It's easy to find. Everybody should know you by now, Jimmy. Can't thank you enough for doing this. Always good to talk to you.
No, I appreciate it, man. I love talking minor league baseball, so appreciate you having me on.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Don't forget to follow Houston Sports Talk on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, the Google Podcast app, or the Stitcher app. You can support us by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or by telling your friends about us. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.